You think you're making decisions, that each choice begins in the moment you become aware of it, that it starts there, in thought, in intention, in conscious evaluation, that you evaluate, consider, and then move. That first comes reflection, then direction, then action. But most of the time, you are not deciding. You are continuing. You are stepping into motion that was already underway. Before you noticed yourself inside it, there is a difference between choosing something and following a path that was already in motion. A difference between authorship and momentum, between presence and continuation. And that difference is almost invisible from the inside, because when a pattern repeats, it doesn't announce itself. It does not arrive with a warning. It does not say, "This is not new." It feels natural, reasonable, even intentional. It feels earned. It feels personal. It feels like the result of who you are. You wake up and move through the same sequence, the same orientation, the same emotional posture, the same invisible order of perception, reaction, explanation. Not because you planned it that way, but because the structure is already there, waiting, stable, familiar, already prepared to receive you. The moment you return, you don't question it, because it doesn't feel imposed. It feels like you, like your preferences, your instincts, your way, your truth. And that is what makes it difficult to interrupt. This is how scripts operate, not as words, but as sequences, as timing, as expectations about what comes next, as learned transitions between one internal state and another. You don't read them, you move through them, you inhabit them before you can describe them. And because of that, they remain difficult to detect. Not hidden exactly, just embedded, so close to your own movement that they disappear into it. Most people believe their thoughts are guiding their behavior, that thinking leads and action follows. But often, their thoughts are only explaining it, arriving after the movement has already begun, after the shift in tone, after the emotional direction, after the body has already leaned toward what comes next, giving coherence to something that was already unfolding, giving language to a process that did not begin in language. This is why you can justify almost anything, not because you are dishonest, not because you are trying to deceive, but because the explanation comes after the direction. And once movement starts, the mind reorganizes itself to support it, to reduce friction, to preserve continuity, to make the unfolding feel internally consistent, builds a story that protects the motion already happening. And if the story fits well enough, it becomes difficult to notice that it came late. The script does not need to be explicit. It only needs to be repeated, often enough, consistently enough, under similar conditions, in similar moods, around similar people, inside similar forms of tension, hope, fear, urgency, reward. That is enough. Repetition builds familiarity. Familiarity builds trust. And what is trusted is rarely examined. You return to the same reactions, the same interpretations, the same emotional conclusions, the same narrowing of meaning, the same predictions about what this means, what they meant, what will happen next. Not because they are accurate, but because they are available. They are ready, close at hand, already shaped. And availability is often mistaken for truth. What comes quickly feels convincing. What appears first often feels fundamental. Even when it is only rehearsed, there is a moment, brief and unstable, where the script has not yet fully taken over. A moment before completion, before the familiar interpretation locks in, before emotion becomes certainty, before action becomes inevitable, where something different could happen, where the sequence is still open enough to be interrupted. But that moment requires attention, and attention is exactly what repetition reduces. Because repetition does not only create behavior, it also dulls perception. Because the more familiar something becomes, the less you look at it, the less you question it, the less you interrupt it, the less detail you register. While it is happening, it becomes compressed, automatic, efficient. You stop seeing the structure because you have moved through it too many times without resistance. And what is uninterrupted begins to feel inevitable. And so the script continues, quietly, without resistance, without visibility, without needing permission. It does not force itself. It simply proceeds. And because it proceeds smoothly, it is mistaken for truth, for personality, for reality itself, until something disrupts it. Not a thought, not a realization, not an abstract understanding arrived at too late, but a break in the sequence, a hesitation, a pause that was not there before, a delayed reaction, a moment where the expected transition fails to complete itself with its usual speed. Something misfires. Something doesn't arrive on cue. And in that gap, for the first time, the structure becomes visible. That is where change begins. Not in deciding differently, not in promising yourself that next time will be different, but in seeing the script while it is still running, while the mechanism is active, while the interpretation is forming, while the sequence is still building itself in real time. Not after the fact, not as analysis, but as direct perception. Because once you see it clearly, not after, not in memory, but in motion, something shifts. Even if nothing external changes yet. Even if the action still completes itself. Even if the old ending still happens. The visibility changes the structure. Because what was automatic is now being witnessed. And what is witnessed cannot remain fully unconscious in the same way. You are no longer fully inside it. You are no longer identical to the sequence. And even if you still follow it, it no longer feels invisible. It no longer feels seamless. There is now a split between the movement and the seeing of the movement. A distance, however small. And that distance matters. Because it is the first space in which freedom is not imagined, but prepared. That is the first fracture. The moment where repetition loses its certainty. The moment where inevitability stops feeling complete. Not because the old pattern is gone, but because it has been seen as pattern. And once something is recognized as repetition, it can no longer fully disguise itself as necessity. And from there, slowly, something else becomes possible. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not through force. But through interruption becoming slightly more available than before. Through the pause lasting a second longer. Through the script failing to close with its usual precision. Through attention arriving early enough to witness the turn. And then one day, what once only repeated begins to loosen. What once felt like identity begins to look like conditioning. What once felt unquestionable begins to reveal its construction. And in that revealing, you do not become someone new. You become less automatic, less absorbed, less entirely carried by what began before you noticed it. And maybe that is what freedom is at first. Not the power to create an entirely different self, but the ability to remain present long enough to see what is moving through you before you call it choice. If you recognize the pattern, watch the next video, because this doesn't stop here. It continues there.